Sarah Mitchell stood in front of the crumbling Victorian mansion, her 8-year-old daughter Emma clutching her hand tightly. The realtor had warned her about the property's condition, but seeing it in person was overwhelming. Paint peeled from the weathered siding, shutters hung askew, and weeds had claimed what was once a manicured garden. Yet something about this house in the small town of Millbrook, Connecticut, called to her. "Mommy, it looks scary," Emma whispered, her voice barely audible over the autumn wind rustling through the bare oak trees. Sarah squeezed her daughter's hand reassuringly. "Sometimes the most beautiful things are hidden beneath what looks broken, sweetheart." She thought of her late husband David, who had always seen potential where others saw problems. He would have loved this challenge. The realtor, Mrs. Henderson, emerged from her car with a ring of old keys. "I have to be honest with you, Mrs. Mitchell. This house has been empty for 15 years. The previous owner, Eleanor Whitmore, passed away with no living relatives. The estate just wants it sold quickly. $700 is practically giving it away, but it needs extensive work." Sarah nodded. Her teacher's salary stretched thin since David's passing from cancer 2 years ago. The life insurance had covered medical bills and funeral expenses, leaving little for their fresh start. This house represented hope, a chance to build something new from the ashes of their old life. Inside, the mansion revealed its former grandeur: high ceilings with ornate molding, a grand staircase with an intricately carved banister, and rooms that spoke of elegant dinner parties and family gatherings. Dust motes danced in the afternoon sunlight streaming through tall windows, and their footsteps echoed on the hardwood floors. "The electrical needs updating and the plumbing requires attention," Mrs. Henderson explained, her voice echoing in the empty parlor. "But the bones of this house are solid. Built in 1892 by the Whitmore family. They were prominent in the textile industry." Emma ran ahead, her sneakers squeaking on the floor as she explored. "Mom, there's a library with books still on the shelves." Sarah followed her daughter's voice, finding herself in a room lined floor to ceiling with leather-bound volumes. The smell of old paper and leather filled her nostrils, reminding her of the university library where she'd met David. He'd been researching American literature while she studied education. Their first conversation had been about the power of stories to change lives. "We'll take it," Sarah announced, surprising herself with the decisiveness in her voice. Mrs. Henderson raised an eyebrow. "Don't you want to see the rest of the house first? The upstairs, the attic?" "I've seen enough," Sarah replied, watching Emma trace her finger along the spines of books. "This feels like home." The paperwork was surprisingly simple. Within a week, Sarah and Emma were moving their modest belongings into the mansion. Their furniture looked lost in the vast rooms, but Emma's laughter echoing through the halls made it feel alive again. Their first night, they camped out in the master bedroom with sleeping bags and takeout pizza. Emma had insisted on exploring every room, her initial fear replaced by excitement about their castle, as she'd begun calling it. "Tell me about Daddy," Emma said as they lay in the darkness looking up at the ornate ceiling. Sarah's throat tightened. Even after 2 years, talking about David remained difficult. He would have loved this place. Remember how he always said that every old thing has a story to tell? Like the books in the library? Exactly like that. Sarah pulled Emma closer. He believed that sometimes we have to look beyond what we see on the surface to find the real treasure. The next morning brought their first real challenge. The heating system had failed during the night, and they woke to their breath visible in the cold air. Sarah called a local handyman, Tom Bradley, who arrived within an hour. Tom was a weathered man in his 60s with kind eyes and calloused hands. He'd lived in Millbrook his entire life and remembered the Whitmore family well. "Eleanor was a fascinating woman," he said, as he examined the old boiler in the basement. "Traveled the world, collected all sorts of things, shame she died alone. This house was her pride and joy." "What happened to all her belongings?" Sarah asked, helping him carry tools. "Most went to auction years ago, but she was secretive about some things. Always said the house held more than people knew." Tom's eyes twinkled with local folklore. Course, that could just be small-town talk. Over the following weeks, Sarah threw herself into making the house livable. She painted walls, refinished floors, and slowly brought warmth back to the cold rooms. Emma helped enthusiastically, her small hands surprisingly capable with a paintbrush. The townspeople were welcoming but curious. At the local grocery store, Sarah met Janet Walsh, a retired librarian who had known Eleanor Whitmore personally. Eleanor was brilliant, Janet explained as they stood in the produce aisle. She had degrees in art history and archaeology, spent years traveling through Europe after her husband died young. She never had children, poured all her love into that house and her collections. Collections? Sarah asked, intrigued. Oh yes, she had an eye for beautiful things. Paintings, sculptures, rare books. She was quite secretive about some pieces, though. Always said she was protecting them for future generations. That evening, Sarah found herself staring at the ceiling of the master bedroom, thinking about Eleanor's words. Future generations. Was that why the house had called to her? Was she meant to be its next guardian? Emma had adapted to their new life with the resilience of childhood. She'd started at the local elementary school and quickly made friends. Her teacher, Miss Roberts, had mentioned Emma's improved confidence and creativity since the move. She talks about your house constantly, Miss Roberts had said during a parent conference. She's written 3 stories about living in a mansion. Her imagination has really blossomed. One rainy Saturday afternoon, Emma was playing in the library while Sarah worked on stripping wallpaper in the dining room. The sound of her daughter's voice drifted through the house as she read aloud to her stuffed animals, creating elaborate stories about the book's adventures. "Mom!" Emma's excited voice suddenly called out. "Come look at this!" Sarah found her daughter standing on a chair, reaching toward a high shelf. "I was trying to get that red book, and I felt something weird behind it." Sarah climbed up beside her and felt along the back of the shelf. Her fingers found a small lever hidden behind the books. When she pressed it, a section of the bookshelf swung inward with a soft click. "A secret door," Emma gasped, her eyes wide with wonder. Behind the bookshelf was a narrow staircase leading upward, different from the main staircase to the second floor. The air smelled musty but not unpleasant, carrying hints of old wood and something else Sarah couldn't identify. "Should we explore?" Sarah asked, her heart racing with excitement and nervousness. Emma nodded eagerly. "Daddy always said the best adventures happen when you're brave enough to look." They retrieved flashlights and began climbing the hidden stairs. The steps were solid despite their age, and the staircase led to a door at the top. Sarah turned the old brass handle, and the door opened to reveal a room she'd never seen before. It was a hidden attic space, much larger than the regular attic accessible from the second floor. Unlike the dusty, cobweb-filled space she'd expected, this room was clean and organized. Paintings lined the walls, covered with white sheets. Sculptures stood on pedestals, also draped. Along one wall, glass cases held what appeared to be ancient artifacts. "It's like a museum," Emma whispered, her voice filled with awe. Sarah approached the nearest covered painting and carefully lifted the sheet. Beneath was a stunning landscape that took her breath away. The brushwork was masterful, the colors still vibrant despite the painting's obvious age. In the corner, she could make out a signature that made her heart skip. "This can't be real," she murmured, moving to the next painting. One by one, she uncovered the artworks. Each piece was more magnificent than the last. Landscapes, portraits, still lifes, all bearing signatures of artists she recognized from her art appreciation classes in college. Names that belonged in the world's greatest museums. Emma had discovered the glass cases and was peering at ancient pottery and jewelry. "Mom, look at these pretty stones." Sarah joined her daughter and gasped. The cases contained what appeared to be ancient artifacts: Greek pottery, Roman coins, Egyptian jewelry. Each piece was carefully labeled with small cards written in Eleanor's precise handwriting. In the center of the room stood an ornate desk with a leather-bound journal. Sarah opened it with trembling hands and found Eleanor's detailed notes about each piece in the collection. The entries dated back decades, chronicling her travels and acquisitions. Acquired in Florence, 1967, one entry read, "Authenticated by Professor Martinez at the university. Estimated value." The number that followed made Sarah's knees weak. She flipped through page after page, each entry more astounding than the last. Eleanor hadn't just been a collector, she'd been a scholar and preservationist. Her notes revealed extensive research into each piece's provenance and historical significance. At the back of the journal, Sarah found a letter addressed to the future guardian of this collection. Her hands shook as she read Eleanor's elegant script. "If you are reading this, then you have found what I spent my lifetime protecting. These pieces represent humanity's greatest artistic achievements, saved from war, theft, and neglect. I could not bear to see them locked away in private collections or lost to history. I have spent my fortune ensuring their preservation, waiting for someone who would understand their true value, not monetary, but cultural and historical. The letter continued. I chose to hide them here, in this house that has always been my sanctuary, trusting that the right person would eventually find them. Someone who sees beyond surface appearances, who understands that the greatest treasures are often hidden in the most unexpected places. Sarah sank into the chair beside the desk, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what they'd discovered. According to Eleanor's careful documentation, the collection was worth over $120 million. But more than the monetary value, Sarah was struck by the responsibility Eleanor had entrusted to her. These weren't just valuable objects. They were pieces of human history, carefully preserved by a woman who had dedicated her life to protecting them. "Mom, are you okay?" Emma asked, noticing her mother's tears. Sarah pulled her daughter close. "I'm more than okay, sweetheart. I think we've just discovered why this house called to us." As they sat in the hidden room, surrounded by centuries of human creativity and achievement, Sarah felt David's presence strongly. He would have understood the significance of this moment, the weight of the responsibility they'd inherited. The rain continued to fall outside, but inside their mansion, Sarah and Emma had found something far more valuable than they'd ever imagined. They'd found their purpose, their calling to be guardians of history itself. Eleanor's final words in the letter resonated in Sarah's mind. The true treasure is not in owning these pieces, but in ensuring they survive for future generations to appreciate and learn from. You are now their protector. Use this gift wisely. Sarah looked around the room one more time, then at her daughter's wonder-filled face. Tomorrow would bring decisions about authentication, insurance, and the complex process of determining what to do with such an incredible discovery. But tonight, they would simply marvel at the magic of finding treasure in the most unexpected place. As they made their way back down the hidden staircase, Emma chattering excitedly about their discovery, Sarah realized that Eleanor had been right about one thing. Sometimes the most valuable things in life are hidden beneath what appears broken or forgotten. Their $700 mansion had given them far more than a home. It had given them a legacy, a purpose, and proof that sometimes taking a leap of faith leads to the most extraordinary destinations. The widow and her daughter had bought a house, but they'd found a treasure that would change not just their lives, but potentially the lives of countless others who would one day benefit from Eleanor's carefully preserved collection. In the days that followed their incredible discovery, Sarah found herself caught between excitement and overwhelming responsibility. She'd contacted Dr. Patricia Henley, an art authentication expert from Yale University, who had agreed to examine the collection. The professor's initial assessment over the phone had been cautiously optimistic, but she'd insisted on seeing the pieces in person. Dr. Henley arrived on a crisp Thursday morning, her silver hair pulled back in a professional bun, and her eyes sharp with decades of experience in art authentication. She carried several cases of equipment and was accompanied by her graduate assistant Marcus, a young man whose enthusiasm for art history was immediately apparent. "Mrs. Mitchell, Dr. D." Henley said as Sarah led them to the hidden room. "I must tell you that in 30 years of authentication work, I've rarely been as intrigued by a discovery as this one. Eleanor Whitmore's reputation in academic circles was impeccable, but we had no idea she'd amassed such a collection." As they climbed the secret staircase, Sarah's heart pounded. What if she'd been wrong? What if the pieces weren't authentic? The past week had been a whirlwind of sleepless nights and anxious research, trying to understand the magnitude of what they'd found. Dr. Henley's reaction upon entering the hidden room was immediate and profound. She stopped in the doorway, her hand pressed to her chest, and whispered, "My God." For the next 6 hours, the professor and her assistant methodically examined each piece. They used specialized lights, magnifying equipment, and took countless photographs. Sarah watched nervously as they scrutinized brushstrokes, examined canvas backing, and studied the provenance documentation Eleanor had so carefully maintained. "This Monet," Dr. Henley said, her voice filled with reverence as she examined a water lily painting. "It's from his private collection. It was thought to have been destroyed during World War II. Eleanor somehow saved it. Marcus was equally amazed by a small sculpture they identified as an early work by Rodin. "The documentation is extraordinary," he told Sarah. "Eleanor didn't just collect these pieces, she researched their entire histories. This level of scholarship is remarkable." Emma had been at school during the authentication process, but when she returned that afternoon, she found the house buzzing with activity. "Dr. Henley was on her phone with colleagues, her voice animated as she described their findings. "Mom, are the art people still here?" Emma asked, dropping her backpack by the door. "They are, sweetheart, and they've confirmed what we hoped. Eleanor's collection is genuine." Dr. Henley ended her call and approached them with a smile that seemed to light up her entire face. "Mrs. Mitchell, I need you to sit down for this conversation." They gathered in the library, Emma curled up beside her mother on the old leather sofa while Dr. Henley consulted her notes. "Based on our preliminary authentication and current market values, this collection is worth approximately $123 million, she began. "But its cultural and historical value is immeasurable. Several of these pieces were thought to be lost forever." Sarah felt dizzy. The number was so large it seemed abstract, impossible to comprehend. "However," Dr. Henley continued, "there are important decisions you need to make. A collection of this magnitude comes with significant responsibilities and costs. Insurance alone will be substantial, and proper conservation requires climate-controlled storage and regular maintenance." "What are our options?" Sarah asked, her practical teacher's mind trying to process the information. "You could sell the entire collection at auction, which would make you extremely wealthy but would likely scatter the pieces to private collectors worldwide. You could donate everything to museums, which would preserve Eleanor's vision but provide no financial benefit. Or you could explore a hybrid approach, keeping some pieces, selling others, and donating the rest." That evening, after Dr. Henley and Marcus had left with promises to return the following week with full authentication reports, Sarah and Emma sat in their kitchen eating dinner. The normalcy of mac and cheese and homework felt surreal after the day's revelations. "What do you think we should do?" Sarah asked her daughter. Emma considered the question seriously, twirling pasta around her fork. What would Eleanor want us to do? The wisdom in her 8-year-old's question struck Sarah deeply. That's exactly the right question to ask. They spent the evening rereading Eleanor's journal and letters, searching for clues about her intentions. One passage stood out. "Art belongs to humanity, not to individuals. My role has been to protect these pieces until they could find their proper home." Over the weekend, Sarah made several phone calls. She spoke with museum curators, financial advisors, and legal experts. Each conversation added another layer of complexity to their situation, but also helped clarify her thinking. On Monday morning, she received an unexpected visitor. Janet Walsh, the retired librarian who had known Eleanor, appeared at their door with a plate of homemade cookies and a knowing smile. "I heard about your discovery," Janet said as they sat in the parlor. "The whole town's buzzing with rumors, though most people don't know the full extent of what you found." "Did Eleanor ever mention the collection to you?" Sarah asked. Janet nodded slowly. "Not directly, but she once told me that she'd found a way to ensure her life's work would continue after she was gone. She said the house would choose its next guardian, someone who would understand the responsibility. Do you think she somehow knew we'd find it?" "Eleanor was a remarkable woman," Janet replied. "She believed in fate, in things happening for a reason. The fact that a teacher, someone dedicated to education and preserving knowledge, bought her house, I don't think that's a coincidence." That afternoon, Sarah made a decision that felt both terrifying and absolutely right. She called Dr. Henley with her proposal. "I want to create a foundation," Sarah explained, "something that honors Eleanor's vision while making the collection accessible to the public. We'll keep the house as a private museum and educational center, sell some pieces to fund the foundation's operations, and loan others to major museums worldwide." Dr. Henley was quiet for a moment before responding. "That's exactly what Eleanor would have wanted. It's ambitious, but with the right support it could be extraordinary." The next few months were a whirlwind of activity. Sarah took a leave of absence from teaching to focus on establishing the Whitmore Foundation for Art Preservation and Education. Legal documents were filed, insurance policies secured, and plans drawn up for converting part of the mansion into a proper museum space. Emma threw herself into the project with the enthusiasm only a child could muster. She helped design educational materials for visiting school groups and even suggested they create a children's treasure hunt through the house. "Kids love mysteries," she told her mother. "We should let them discover things the way we did." The local community rallied around the project. Tom Bradley, the handyman who had fixed their heating, volunteered to oversee the mansion's restoration. Local businesses offered support, and the town council fast-tracked the necessary permits for the museum conversion. Dr. Henley became an invaluable advisor, helping Sarah navigate the complex world of art authentication, conservation, and museum management. She also connected them with other experts who were eager to be involved in such a significant cultural project. "What you're doing is revolutionary," Dr. Henley told Sarah during one of their planning meetings. "Most major art discoveries end up in private hands or existing institutions. Creating a new foundation, especially one focused on education and accessibility, is remarkable." 6 months after their discovery, the Whitmore Foundation held its first public event. The mansion's main floor had been carefully restored and converted into gallery space, while the hidden room remained a special exhibition area for the most valuable pieces. Sarah stood in the main hallway, watching as visitors explored Eleanor's collection. Children pressed their faces against display cases, their eyes wide with wonder. Art students sketched in notebooks, and elderly visitors shared stories about pieces they remembered from their youth. Emma, now 9 and even more confident than before, served as an unofficial junior tour guide. She delighted in telling visitors about their discovery, her enthusiasm infectious as she described finding the secret door. "And then my mom pressed the hidden button, and the whole bookshelf moved," she explained to a group of fascinated children. "It was like something from a movie, but it was real." The foundation's success exceeded everyone's expectations. Within a year, they were hosting school groups from across New England, offering art education programs, and collaborating with major museums on traveling exhibitions. Sarah had kept her promise to Eleanor in every way possible. The collection remained intact and accessible. The house had been preserved as a center of learning, and the foundation ensured that future generations would benefit from Eleanor's life's work. Standing in the library where their adventure had begun, Sarah often thought about the chain of events that had led them here. David's death had forced them to start over, leading them to a house that seemed too good to be true. Eleanor's careful planning had preserved a treasure for decades, waiting for the right person to find it. But perhaps most remarkably, a widow's desperate search for a fresh start had become a legacy that would impact countless lives. The $700 mansion had given them far more than a home. It had given them purpose, community, and proof that sometimes the most extraordinary gifts come disguised as ordinary opportunities. Emma, now thriving in her role as the foundation's youngest ambassador, often reminded visitors of the lesson their discovery had taught them. "My mom always says that the best treasures are the ones you find when you're brave enough to look beyond what everyone else sees." As Sarah watched her daughter share their story with another group of wide-eyed children, she realized that Eleanor had been right about everything. The house had chosen its guardian well, and the treasure they'd found was worth far more than any monetary value could express. Hey, my friends, help me by subscribing to the channel so we can reach 1,000 subscribers, even if you're watching from your TV or computer. Your subscription makes all the difference, and the algorithm will help you see more amazing stories. Leave a like or an emoji in the comments and be part of this growth.